What's good, everybody? It's your brother Mad Black, the most dangerous and the most toxic black man on the internet, and I'm black up in your face again with some more pro black commentary. So, if you've been a black content creator for any amount of time and you're a black content creator who actually does content based on issues that have to do with race or discrimination or racism, you've probably dealt with this comment over and over again. And that is the whole philosophy of a lot of these white trolls, where they tell you that basically, if you as a black person talk about race, or you bring up race at all, or discrimination or racism in your commentary, that you in fact are the racist and you're the one that's keeping racism going. So I've been told very recently that, the fact that I even bring up race at all, that's what keeps racism going. And apparently, these white folks, they feel that me talking about race or bringing up the hypocrisy I see in certain situations where it concerns race, that I am the one that keeps racism going. Now, obviously, this is a bunch of BS. This is a philosophy and basically just some nonsense that white people spew because you're making them feel uncomfortable by talking about race. That's basically what it is. For them, they rather, if you're going to be a black person on social media, they rather you be a buck dancing, boot licking coon, or just someone who makes them laugh all the time. Okay, when you as a black person start bringing up race or racial issues, that messes with their, because they think every black person is just happy go lucky and just so happy to be in America and to be part of American society, that, what we got everything we could want for. What is going on with black folks? Like, there's nothing wrong. You're living in America, right? You're not as bad off as those Africans who are still over in Africa. You should be happy to be here. I've even heard that philosophy where they'll tell you that you're better off, that your ancestors were brought here in chains and you lived here. They lived here as slaves and you were able to grow up here in America. You're better off. So just letting you black content creators out there know that when you talk about race, that you're the one that keeps racism going. Now, this philosophy doesn't work for anybody else. Like, if a Jewish person talks about the rise of the Nazi Party or what happened in Germany, or they make comparisons to what happens now, they're not keeping Nazism going. You see, when a Latino person talks about some of the discrimination that they faced here in America, they're not keeping that discrimination going. If an Asian person does the same, they're not keeping that discrimination going. This only applies to black people for some strange reason. It's only black people that somehow we're the ones that keep racism going when we bring up these issues. And, once again, I've talked about this before, but I'll say it again, that it's the relationship between black people and white people here in America. White people judge their entire being on how black people are doing, you see. So if they perceive black people as doing bad or lower than them, then they feel everything is okay. That's America operating within the status quo. But if they somehow see that we're elevating or that we're even bringing up our grievances, that's a problem for them. If I can make this is a terrible comparison, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Black people in America, let's say we're part of a family sitting at the family table, and we're the child that was basically molested by the father and the mother in the family, but we're told not to talk about it because that's going to ruin the family gathering. You see, even though we were physically, verbally, sexually, emotionally, and spiritually abused by our parents, we're told we're not supposed to say anything because if we bring it up, we're going to mess up the barbecue. You see, we're going to mess up the family reunion if we bring that up. So That's the position that black people have within, if you can consider America like a family, you see. So they don't want us to talk about that sort of thing. The fact that mom and dad kept us chained up in the basement and, we had to eat rats and everything just to survive. They don't want to hear that. Okay, we're just supposed to sit there, smile at the table, and make it seem like everything is okay. That's basically how our relationship is. And one of the reasons I don't take this whole, me talking about racism keeps racism going seriously is because it's an old tactic. Okay, they've been saying that about black people since black people and white people even interacted with one another. You see, they said this about the Native Americans as well. Like, the Native Americans are the ones that keep things going because the Native Americans are fighting back because these colonials are pushing them off their land. That somehow that makes the Native Americans wrong. They're keeping the conflict going, you see. With black people, they used to say you had a mental illness if you were a black person who wanted to be free of slavery. They called it drapetomania. So if you were one of these black people who would fight against slavery, or a black person who didn't want to be enslaved, or you would always you kept escaping or trying to escape to freedom, there was something mentally wrong with you, you see. So this is not a new concept. Even with the abolitionists, they said there was something wrong with abolitionists because they were going against what God said. Slavery was ordained by God. God said this is what life was supposed to be like. And if you were going against that, there was something wrong with you. Now, let's not pretend that all abolitionists believed in the equality of the black man and the black woman to white folks. That's not true. For a lot of those white abolitionists, what they just didn't want slavery. Basically, but they didn't believe in the equality of black people. They were like that hating dude. You remember that movie Belly, where he called the police on the other drug dealers because they were making more money than him. I don't like that shit. These guys are making more money. I'm gonna drop a dime on them niggas. Remember that scene? That's basically what the Civil War was. They didn't want the North, and abolitionists were tired of the South making all this money off this free labor. That was the problem they had. It wasn't that they thought black people were equal or black people were the same as whites or they deserved any type of equal treatment or rights under the law of the United States. They just didn't like the whole slavery thing and the free labor and this one group of white folks making more money than them. They didn't like that. So they dropped a dime on them and dropped the Civil War on them, and that's what that was about. Going beyond that, going beyond slavery, even during Reconstruction, you had whites and even some buck dancing, bootlicking Negroes who said things were better now. Slavery was over. So, what the black people who are complaining now, what do they have to even complain about? Them complaining is what keeps the racism going. So them bringing up the fact that they're being pushed out of any type of not being allowed to vote, them not being allowed to participate in local politics, not being able to run for politics, they're getting their towns burned down, there are people being lynched, and men, women, and children being murdered, and nothing being done about it. If you talk about that, that's keeping racism going. You see, if you go back in time, you see that you'll have articles like that any black person who brings up a problem with what was going on in the North and the South, that black person was keeping racism going. You see, because they were putting it in your face that blacks are still being mistreated post-slavery. Actually, more so, because like I said, at that point, black people were not a commodity anymore. So they started treating us really like trash then. You see, and for a lot of the blacks that were starting to do better financially, they would just destroy your whole town or kill off your business somehow. So, like I said, at that point, there were a lot of bootlicking Negroes back then. Jack Johnson being one of them, talking about life is better. We're not slaves anymore. What are black people complaining about? I can go out and have sex with white women freely, and they came down on that Negro with everything they could to try to destroy his life and his career. But this is why I also don't listen to a lot of these dumb Negroes when they say things are better and what are black people complaining about, because that's something old too. bootlicking Negroes have always existed, and their white slave masters and who are mentally controlling them have always existed as well. So moving on, let's move past like the post-World War II years and the building of the civil rights movement. There were whites saying then that black people complaining about the racism going on during Jim Crow, that they were keeping racism going. Dr. King was considered a troublemaker. Like, I know they've tried to rework his whole legacy now and make it seem like they all love Dr. King. That's not the truth. Go read any news article back then or watch some news commentary on Dr. King from back then. He was a troublemaker because he was bringing up the fact that there was racism in this country. He put it in your face again. So he was causing problems. Malcolm X was causing problems by calling white people out on their hypocrisy. They were causing problems, you see. The fact that they would even bring this up and make it seem like America is not the great country that it truly is, they think it is, that's causing problems, and that's keeping racism going, you see. The Black Panthers, they're the ones that are racist. They're causing problems, even though they're very reactionary and reacting to the racism that they were facing in California. They're keeping racism going by what they're saying and doing. Feeding children because no one else is doing it, that's keeping racism going. And being self-sufficient, that's keeping racism going somehow, you see. Those people were considered troublemakers. And once again, this whole mindset of, if you bring up racism or you talk about it and you're not just sitting there smiling like the happy-go-lucky Negro, then you're a problem. And once again, there were Negroes back then during civil rights who said the same thing about Dr. King. They thought Dr. King was a troublemaker because they were allowed to have their little stores and, everything was going good for them at the time. Why are you Negroes here in the South acting up? Why are you being troublemakers? I think I even read somewhere that, Emmett Till's mother was one of those people that thought the same about black people in the South, about like why, what's wrong with these Negroes? Why do they think a certain way? And then her son got killed, got caught up in that whole racist whirlwind, you see? So there are black people who, especially when they keep us disjointed and not united with each other, we're not allowed to talk to each other, who will actually sit out there and think that, these black people who are just out here causing trouble, or they deserve to be mistreated by white supremacy. You even have it now where you'll have, as soon as like a black person is murdered by the police or some vigilante, you'll have some ignorant Negroes come on social media and they'll blame the black person for getting killed. This goes, like I said, this goes all the way back to slavery, this mentality. And it's all mixed in with this white notion of, if you bring up any aspect of racism, then that means you're keeping racism going, even though it's painfully obvious that the act itself was racist in nature. You see, so they don't even want racism or race discussed in these issues. That's one of the first things they'll do when you'll have a situation where a black person is murdered. They'll try to make it seem like race had nothing to do with it. You see, and then they'll have their bootlicking Negroes saying, race had nothing to do with it. You see, this black person was wrong, or whatever excuse they can give. This black person smoked weed on social media. This black person owned a gun. This black person was mean or something like that on social media. He deserved to be killed. You see? They'll do whatever excuse they can make to make it seem as if this black person is evil by nature and he deserved to be killed. Like I said, it's no different than what's been going on in this country since it started. And the interaction between blacks and whites has not changed whatsoever since colonial times and during slavery. This is why I don't get too bent out of shape about it, and this is why I can't be fooled by a lot of the nonsense and the rhetoric. Nothing has changed. Things have modernized, but nothing has changed when it comes to our interaction. We're still all dealing with the same things. We're still all dealing with a lot of the same pathologies, to where, once again, you'll even have black people agreeing with a lot of the nonsense. There are black people during Reconstruction and, before the Civil Rights Movement who were going along with black people being lynched. So when you have coons out here who will co-sign a black person being shot by the police, there are black people back then saying, well, it was the black man's fault for saying something to this white woman. That's why he got lynched. Knowing damn well they can just lynch you for anything, but there are black people going along with that. So we have to be careful when we co-sign nonsense like this. It's not black people talking about racism and bringing up the racism in these incidents is not what keeps racism going. You devils is what keeps racism going. And there's no amount of you coming to my channel and saying that me bringing up the racism or hypocrisy or discrimination or prejudice, that somehow I'm keeping racism going when I bring it up. I'm not keeping it going. You are. I'm just reacting to it. So anyway, you folks let me know how you feel about it in the comments section. I very much like to hear from you, especially from other black content creators who have dealt with the same nonsense where they tell you that you're keeping racism going by talking about it. Anyway, mad black, and I will be back on my foot on the devil's back.